Topic. You're supposed to start your video by saying the topic really loudly to get the viewer's attention, and the topic for this video is cross-promotion. Cross-promotional events have become like the bread and butter of marketing, especially in video games. Every fucking game, every single week seems to have some kind of a crossover with some other piece of media. And despite these being incredibly popular and successful, for me, I don't really care if two companies who make completely separate things, especially things that aren't related in any way, want to both advertise to each other's customer base at the same time. Because that's really all a cross-promotion ever is, it's just a commercial. Now, of course, I'm not made of stone or anything, it's not that they never work on me, but I'm very disinterested if there's not a connection or a history between the two things. The TF2 and Quake promotion is the kind of thing I like. It's still an ad, of course, but at least there's an appreciable nod to the history of one of these games. But when I see something like the Street Fighter X Magic the Gathering crossover, you know, I like Street Fighter. Well, that was a weird reaction. And I, used to like Magic the Gathering, so this should work on me because this is two things that I like, but it just doesn't because what I like about Street Fighter is not that it's a Magic card, and what I liked about Magic is not that there's a Street Fighter card. But luckily, we play Team Fortress 2 on this channel, and Team Fortress 2 is soulful and pure and above all of this, right? No! With how many crossovers Valve did with this game, you would have thought they invented the fucking concept. Back in the earlier days of Steam, it pretty much didn't matter who you were. If you were willing to put your game on the platform, Valve would just give you a cross-promotional event with Team Fortress. That's why we have crossover items for such timeless classics as Alliance of Valiant Arms, The Cave, and Crimecraft Gang Wars. Only the finest of games. Now looking back, these games do seem like they're quite beneath Valve's stature, but you have to remember there was a time when Steam wasn't the PC gaming distribution juggernaut that it is today, so getting people to install the platform to get games or items that they want was pretty important. That's why we have so many promotional updates. But Valve took this one step further than most games. Like most of the time you just get some kind of a skin or some other kind of cosmetic, and in many cases Valve, not really followed suit, but I guess proceeded suit, but some select games also included weapons, like functional weapons that did stuff. I was talking with some friends about weapon balance recently because of a thing I'm doing. Wink, wink. And we were talking about the sun on the stick, and how the sun on the stick can't really be fixed without completely overhauling what the weapon does, because conceptually, it's bad. And I added that it was bad because it wasn't a weapon designed to solve some kind of a problem or enhance Scout's gameplay in some way. It was added just because of a cross-promotional event with Rift, which is a game that I think someone might have even played. Now, naturally, my friends responded by unhinging all of their jaws and screaming in chorus that I would pay for stealing all of those oranges from the farmer's market. But after that, we kind of agreed that, yeah, that could be a liability. And that got me thinking, are promo items just worse? I mean, it would make sense, right? They're being added, probably quite suddenly, to fulfill a marketing agreement, rather than because the team has some kind of a brilliant idea for improving the game. Meaning that we might end up with designs that are fine, but not exceptional, which doesn't necessarily matter because the purpose isn't to make an exceptional design, it's to advertise something. And if you want the short answer, yeah, kind of, in my opinion. There are some, and I do mean some exceptions, like the Widowmaker, but most promotional weapons have some of the weakest designs in the entire game. We're talking things like the Sharpened Volcano Fragment, the Hulong Heater, and the Diamondback. Basically a rogue's gallery of crummy designs that exist to inflate the weapon count without really adding anything of substance. Very few of which have made the game much better, and in some cases have even made the game actively less fun with their presence. So I decided to take a look at which weapons, and more importantly, which crossovers entirely, fell prey to this flawed creation method, and why it didn't end up working except for the very few scattershot individuals who rose above the ranks. And that why is actually pretty simple. Most promotional weapons are the result of a failed balance between top-down and bottom-up game design. These terms, at least as I've known them, come from Magic the Gathering head designer Mark Rosewater. He maintains a blog that talks about all things Magic, and has done so for quite some time, and in one post he discussed this concept. A Magic card, at least a normal one, is made up of two parts. The top half or so contains the name of the card and the card's artwork. The only gameplay up here is the card's resource cost. and the bottom half contains the rules text, basically the mechanical function of the card, what kind of card it is, how powerful and tough it is if it's a creature, basically all of the stuff that makes the card tick once it's actually being played. Top down and bottom up therefore refer to a style of design where you lead yourself either by the idea of the card as depicted by the artwork and the name, for example coming up with the idea for a knight card, and then making rules later to accommodate the artistic expression of the card, or by leading yourself with the functional capabilities of the card first, coming up with something that exists with some kind of a goal in mind for the gameplay, whether that be altering the metagame, solving a problem, or expressing a really cool and versatile design. That being bottom up, because that's where all the rules are. This philosophy exists in every game, not just MTG. You could easily rewrite this as a concept-focused or gameplay-focused design. Personally, I am firmly in the camp that bottom-up design is almost always superior. Bottom-up designs exist to try and make a well-designed gun, character, card from a functional standpoint, where your entire goal is to attempt to make an addition to the gameplay that improves the game somehow, or is just there to be really cool to play. Figuring out the artistic or idealistic parts of the design afterwards is much easier, and frankly, if a character or whatever looks kinda dorky but still plays amazingly, people will still be a fan. Necro from Street Fighter is kind of a dumb-looking character, but he still has a fan base just because of how he plays. The art only has to serve the gameplay to a small degree, and frankly, a weapon model or a character model or whatever it is, looking bad can be easily ignored because it has no impact on the actual game. When you're sitting there and you're playing and you're in a high-octane fight, I doubt most people are going to be thinking, man, this gun just doesn't look very good. Top-down design, on the other hand, is prone to much more catastrophic results. It's much more inspirational for the creator, but making gameplay to serve the visuals is a much worse bet than the inverse. Look at Heavy, for instance. He's one of the more flawed characters in Team Fortress. Slow, easy to play, easy to exploit without much he can really do about it, one-dimensional, not really fun to play against, especially for the kind of high-flying and high-octane classes that separate TF2 from every fucking game released from 2007 to now, just not a character that works out perfectly. And this is partially, in my belief, because Heavy wasn't made to accomplish some kind of design goal or to fit within Team Fortress 2, but because the team in the 90s really liked the minigun scene from The Predator, and they wanted to add that to the game somehow. It's just not as forward-thinking or as well considered, and not all concepts are going to fit within the framework of your game. Designing gameplay first means you're already trying to synergize with your game as it is from the get-go. You're building it up from the jump to already work with the game, whereas top-down design is much more of a square peg, round hole kind of problem, where you have to make the concept fit, and again, not every concept is going to fit, and many more aren't gonna fit well. Now, that being said, it's not like top-down design is completely useless. In fact, especially in the very early stages of development, few concepts are 100% bottom-up, and great designers can take a top-down idea and work it into their game pretty well. And this isn't necessarily always a binary thing. A design can start off bottom-up, and then you can come up with a top-down idea that then inspires another part of the bottom-up design, so on and so forth. It's not black and white. But I do believe top-downs are just more likely to have more significant failure, and I think this is what many promotional items in Team Fortress 2 suffered from. Because again, the purpose of a promo item isn't necessarily to make TF2 better, it's to be visually or thematically consistent with something from another IP, so that you can recognize the thing in TF2 and be informed or reminded of the existence of another game that Valve is trying to advertise, because they're selling it to you on Steam. This is very much a conceptual first endeavor, which is why a lot of promotional packs are just a couple, if even that many, cosmetics. The Skyrim hat isn't there to make TF2 better, it's to look like the Skyrim hat and remind you that Skyrim exists so that the next time you're looking for games, you think about Skyrim. So with this in mind, who's the best and who's the worst? Are there really even any good ones, and how many? Now, as is tradition on this channel, we're only going to be able to find out by consulting the crystal ball that's filled with the vengeful and stolen souls of 1,000 Golden Age pirates. Alright, it seems like they want me to kill myself. We're starting off with the Rift sponsorship because that's what the pirates said and because we already mentioned it. And I have to say, the Rift sponsorship is really weird. I think unironically, everyone knows what's wrong with these weapons at this point, but for the very few people who don't, we're gonna go over them briefly. The problem with the volcano fragment from a design standpoint is that it was doomed from the start. There was pretty much nothing valuable that Valve could give to Pyro in the melee slot that one of his other weapons doesn't already have. If you need damage, you have the back scratcher. If you need to be able
able to sustain yourself, you have the power jack and the back scratcher. You can't do anything with the combo stuff because the extinguisher already does that. You can't do anything for mobility because the power jack already does that. If you need to, I don't know, fuck with spies, I guess, you have the home wrecker. Design-wise, there just really was not a lot of room to work with. Not that Valve really tried or anything. If I had to take a guess as to how the sharpened volcano fragment ended up the way it did, I would assume again that the team probably was a little pressed for time. They already had results for similar weapons like the Tribalman Shiv and the Southern Hospitality, so they knew this design worked, and they decided to make it Afterburn instead of Bleed because it's Pyro, maybe he can combo with it or something, and decided to play it safe, adding a weapon that they were very confident wouldn't cause any problems. Now obviously the design is terrible for one gigantic reason. If you wanted to set somebody on fire as Pyro, all of his primaries do so at much greater range and are much easier to hit people with, and as such it has languished in backpacks ever since its inception, because it's not good, and even more importantly, it's not even fun. And you can say much the same about the other Rift weapon, the Sun on a Stick. Now even though I'm about to talk about how bad this weapon is, I actually use this one. I am the Sun on a Stick's biggest fan, and that's because I am the Sun on a Stick's only fan. And even though I do enjoy the convenience of being able to mitigate some of Afterburn, this thing is still crud. Its design hinges entirely on fire damage. Now, a mechanical reliance like this is not great to begin with, but you can make it work. The extinguisher relies on people to be on fire to get its combo stuff going, and that's the whole reason you use the extinguisher. But the extinguisher is also on Pyro, the one character who can actually consistently burn people. This may come as a surprise, but Scout is not Pyro, and therefore can't really set up his own combos. So the offensive blue text you're probably never getting any use out of, unless you're coordinating with a specific Pyro, like a friend you've brought along. And even then you should probably just be using your scattergun, but either way, I do think that the other line of blue text is actually pretty good. Again, this is why I use this weapon. Scout is more negatively impacted by Afterburn than most other characters because he's got to get in close and he doesn't have very much health. So being able to buy yourself some time after killing a Pyro just long enough so that you can get to a health pack is actually pretty useful, and I've done it a number of times. Still though, this weapon is incredibly narrow, and I think that's a result of, again, top-down design decisions. The team made and art passed these two weapons to be like lava things, and probably thought, well, if they look like lava, they should probably have to deal with fire as a mechanic in some way. And instead of thinking about what these characters actually needed or they could have used, which by the way is not really that hard, like I cracked open the SDK and made this version of the sharpened volcano fragment in 3 minutes and 48 seconds. I had to check the Google tab real quick. And I'm sure this weapon has flaws, it's not been tested, but it could not be worse than the sharpened volcano fragment is today. Going to have to stop myself here because, as it turns out, there's a little more going on than I initially thought. I'll be honest, I initially didn't believe the Rift weapons were based on any actual weapon in Rift. I thought they were just like designs Valve had, because I could not find the equivalences in the game. But luckily, somebody showed me where to look, and it turns out the sharpened volcano fragment and the Sun on a Stick are Rift weapons. What's kind of funny to me though is that for the sharpened volcano fragment at least, Valve just like tried to lift the mechanics of the weapon in Rift and translate them as closely as they could into TF2, which is why it ended up so bad. Why they did this, I have no idea, but that appears to be what they did. However, I think the bottom-up theory still holds up, because the Sun on a Stick is a totally unique design for Team Fortress 2. The weapon in Rift is actually like almost a clone of what the sharpened volcano fragment's equivalent does. So this idea they came up with for the Sun on a Stick is probably just because the weapon is lava stuff. So yeah, this doesn't really change anything, but I figured I would add this here before somebody decided to mention it in the comments. If the team had either taken their time or not been so attached to the idea that these weapons need to be like hot, I guess, they probably could have come up with designs that people would actually play. The best thing I can say about the Rift sponsorship is that the weapons are at least bad. Some people aren't gonna like hearing this, but in my opinion, it's better that a weapon is bad and at the very worst is just taking up space, as opposed to being problematically powerful and subjecting the entire community to the issues it creates. I'm sure everybody would prefer these weapons be useful for at least something, but at best, the Sun on a Stick is at least kind of nichely useful, and you can do some funny stuff with a friend, kind of. And in the worst case scenario, they just make the game like, I don't know, 10 megabytes bigger. This video isn't only about the functions of these weapons, however. We'll be delving into the visual representation a little bit as well, and the visuals for the Rift weapons are surprisingly mediocre. As far as the actual models and the materials go, they're not exactly the highest quality Valve has ever produced. Now, to appease any of the 3D modelers in the audience, I'm going to say that there is technically no such thing as good or bad topology.
It's dependent on the use case for your model, and it's not a binary thing. That being said, some topology is better than other topology, and the topology for the Rift models, which is basically the quality of the modeling job itself, is really amateurish, like surprisingly so. And you might think, oh, well, this was a community-created thing. No, it wasn't. Which is weird, because a lot of the other crossovers were made by community artists, but not this one. This one's from Valve. Now, overall, this doesn't really cause a problem. The Rift weapons in-game are non-deforming, which means they don't, like, bend or move on their own in any way. Like, for example, here's Scout's model rigged in Blender, and I can move his arm around, and his shoulder will roll, and his arm will stretch, and so forth. That's deforming. And the Sun on a Stick and the VSH, they can be moved by another character, like the Scout can swing it around and stuff, but the model itself is just a stiff, rigid thing. So for the most part, you can get away with bad topology and bad modeling because it doesn't animate itself. That being said, these models kind of break a lot of the quote-unquote rules of modeling. As best as you can, a model should be made of one big interconnected series of quads, which are square faces. The quads should also loop around to make sort of circles or cylinders that are easy to follow. This makes working with and animating the models especially a lot easier. And Valve, especially with things that launched with Team Fortress 2, were no slouch at this. If you were to look at something like the Scout's model, you can see that his topology looks like a sort of human-shaped grid. Again, it depends on what you're doing, but this is, generally speaking, the best result. Even early weapon models like the rocket launcher follow the same rules. The Sun on a Stick and the sharpened volcano fragment, on the other hand, not so much. There's a lot of floating geometry, which just doesn't connect to the rest of the model. There's really bad poles, which is where a bunch of faces all share one vertex, which could cause lighting errors. There's also a lot of tris, which are triangular faces as opposed to quads. Now again, this kind of doesn't really matter, but I will say this is a very crude modeling job for such an illustrious company with such talented and skilled artists. The materials on these items are fine. It's really interesting that these have Phong exponent maps, which are basically these images that tell the lighting engine where something should be shinier than the rest of the object, which is weird because this is around the same time that many other weapons, like stock weapons, were losing such maps. These two just happen to kind of sneak in there. The only real problem, I would say, is that the Sun on a Stick has some really bad texture warping caused by bad UVs, but again, nothing super noticeable. It's just kind of not up to the standards you would expect, but maybe we're giving Valve a little too much credit. After all, it was 2011, and Valve was busy building that pyramid for Gabe Newell, so they probably had a lot on their plate. Now, the Weta Workshop Dr. Grordbort's pack is really interesting as far as promos go. The soldier portion of the update was especially noteworthy because 1 out of every 6,000 people who got the items in-game on the first week were vaporized from a lightning strike from Weta Workshop's orbital Tesla cannon. This resulted in the deaths of 12 people, and no one at Weta Workshop was ever held accountable. But outside of that, this was also really weird because Weta Workshop wasn't promoting any kind of a game or anything. Dr. Grordbort's Aether oscillator were like a series of physical props you could purchase from them, and they were well out of the price range of most people for this sort of thing. For example, the Fourth Law, which was one of the different props they made, only had 20 copies produced, and each of them would cost you at least like $6,000. This priced out almost everybody, so there was no reasonable expectation, I think, on Valve's part that people were gonna buy something from Weta Workshop, and even if they did, it's not like Valve was getting any kind of a cut as far as I can see. Valve just did this because they thought it was cool, I guess. I suppose they couldn't help but be enchanted by the Mule Molester 600. The Weta Workshop promo is...
The what?
The Weta Workshop promo is one of the most extensive catalogs of items added for one of these kinds of updates. There were 7 weapons added across the different patches, which dwarfs all other promotions and eclipses the Rift crossover. But are they any good? Kind of. Some of them. The best weapon design-wise, and I don't think this is even remotely arguable, is the Eureka effect. The Eureka effect is great. It allows the engineer to do really cool stuff, including allowing skillful engineers to build a full level 3 nest during setup,
Fuck, I didn't do the thing.
Allowing the engineer to ambush enemies with hidden teleporter exits, and also just allowing smart engineers to be able to escape bad situations with careful placement of an animation. It's fun, it's fair, it's a great addition to the game. Every other weapon on the list is problematic in one way or another. The third degree, for instance, is just better than the fire axe, and being better than the stock melee doesn't really matter. Pretty much every melee unlock in the game is either more interesting, more fun, or better than their stock equivalent. I have a whole video on this, but the basic premise is that all of the stock melees weren't really designed to be good or fun.
And I don't even mean that as like a sarcastic quip, or as legal advice, by the way, because I lost my license. I mean that genuinely. Melee weapons were designed to be undesirable. They exist, with some exceptions, to be a failsafe for when you don't have any ammo. They're supposed to be something you don't want to be stuck with, as a punishment for, like, running out of ammo. Whereas melee unlocks are designed to be either useful or cool or interesting in some way. They're supposed to be a weapon you actually want to use. And frankly, I think the few times where the third degree does its funny medic kill stuff is way more valuable than, like, the honor of the fire axe or whatever. There shouldn't be weapons that are just better than others, that's true, but nerfing the third degree is not going to make the fire axe fun. That being said, it is bad housekeeping. The Thompson is a hilarious laundry list of problems with no real clear design goal. They just kind of thought of stuff that a weapon could do, I guess, like, oh, what if it got rid of Uber? Never mind the fact that the medic can just completely nullify the lost Uber in like a second. Like, there's a ton of videos on this weapon. It's garbage. It's one of the more difficult weapons to use, and even when you're doing so successfully, you are rewarded with being a minor inconvenience to certain enemies. You don't even get to do anything cool. You just get to sit there and think to yourself, man, this really isn't the shotgun, huh? I think this is another example of the team not really having a mature or concrete design goal. I'm almost completely convinced they were just like, okay, we need to make a laser gun. What does a laser gun do in TF2? Somebody suggested, oh, it's a laser gun, so it should zap things like cloak meter, I guess, and they just went with that. I don't know how the Thompson came to reality. I don't know how any game developer worth their salt, especially one as experienced and as talented as Valve, could see what they made, like playtest the Thompson, see how miserably difficult it is to get anything out of it, and still just ship it like this. I don't know if the guys in the internal playtesting, if that happened, were just like really good and were giving their medics and their spies a lot of trouble, or maybe Valve just overvalued the Ubercharge drain, but I would probably just put my money on the possibility that maybe Valve kinda didn't care after a while. It's also possible that Valve maybe just hated this weapon, and that's a joke, but there are so many stats that are just worse on this weapon that are hidden for some reason, like the 28% worse fire rate, the 34% smaller magazine capacity, and the 25% base damage reduction. And I don't know why anybody would put all of these stats on a weapon and then not tell you unless they hated you. And if they hate us, that means we have no moral obligation not to go to their office and track mud all over the carpet. Now, the Thompson does have its little cousin, the Bison, and at the very least, the Bison fared a lot better, but very infamously did get its wings clipped for some reason. The Bison's mechanics were at least interesting in their initial realization. Soldier is an aggressive character who just kinda goes up and shoots people, so designing weapons for him is really not very difficult. And where the Thompson does like nothing for engineers specifically, the Bison was basically just a second smaller rocket launcher for the Soldier, which was fun to use. And that's all a soldier weapon needs to do, is just be fun to kill people with. It also synergized pretty well with the Cowmangler, because while the Cowmangler and the Bison can't really do damage to buildings, the Bison can shoot through them, or at least it could. I was going to boot up Team Fortress 2 and check that, but I've been stuck in the genie's lamp for the last 9 hours or so, ever since he tricked me with my third wish. So if anybody wants to, like rub the side of that, that would be really appreciated. The idea being that even though you can't blow up sentry nests as easily, the Righteous Bison does allow you to shoot through them and damage the engineer behind them. But ever since the supposedly reverted nerfs, the Bison just doesn't really have the punch to leverage that strategy. Though I have to admit, I think this weapon is a little bit over-criticized. It certainly isn't good by any means, but I do think it's not as bad as people seem to... Okay, I gotta pause myself right here and prevent myself from saying something I'll regret. The reason I was about to say this is because when I was recording this, I played like 3 games with the Bison, and in those games I actually did pretty well, and the Bison wasn't doing that poorly. And it's been a long time since I played with the Bison, so I thought to myself, oh, maybe it really isn't as bad as people think, and then I played more. And yeah, it is not good. I'm not sure how much I can say the same for the Cowmangler. Depending on the game mode you're playing and which team you're on, the Cow Mangler is just better than the rocket launcher. And the only legitimate downside it has only affects one character. I'm honestly surprised we don't see more of this, because if you're on defense on an asymmetrical mode, this weapon is basically just the rocket launcher, and you have a charge shot, and you never have to go get ammo. Problems only ever arise around sentry guns, and obviously, if you're on the red team, you're probably going to have more sentry guns than the blue team. Or if they do, yours are going to be in much better positions. The only other downside is that the Cow Mangler can't get full crits, it only gets mini crits instead. But as long as your medic is paying attention and uses their crits Krieg, if they even have that equipped on somebody who isn't you, you'll be okay. And it's not like mini-crit rockets are anything to sneeze at either. These are extremely manageable downsides, and in a lot of cases, the Cow Mangler is just better than the rocket launcher. Now, I know we had an entire discussion about why it's okay for the third degree to be better than the fire axe, so why is it not okay for the Cow Mangler to be better than the rocket launcher? Well, the very simple reason is that no one ever wants to play with the fire axe. Nobody has wanted to play with the fire axe unless there was, like, I don't know, some kind of achievement or something they were trying to do, since Valve released alternatives, because the fire axe sucks and it's boring. The rocket launcher does not suck and it's not boring. It's an extremely powerful and beloved weapon, and it doesn't need a replacement. So why don't I see more of this weapon then, you might say? I think honestly it just comes down to the fact that getting ammo for Soldier is not particularly difficult, like you can just rocket jump over to it if you absolutely need to, even though you do consume more of it than the average character, but also because the few times where you have to deal with like a mini sentry or something are a big enough pain in the ass that it's just not worth taking the Cow Mangler. Again, that upside can be strong, but it's a bit negligible. The only real draw to this weapon is the charge shot, and the charge shot is okay. Personally, I sympathize with the sweatier audiences who don't really like the charge shot because it's kind of frustrating to be playing a light class, especially medic, to round a corner and then to get instantly vaporized by a giant ball of plasma. But at least the Cow Mangler is no longer like its old version, which used to have an extra shot in the magazine, and the charge shot used to, for some reason, just launch you into the skybox, because it wasn't enough that you got hit with a mini Crockett and that you got lit on fire, you also had to get rocketed to the top of the map and take fall damage as well. See, fun in a video game is when 37 bad things happen to you all at once. The charge shot in casual is much less problematic, pretty much just because it's less organized. I still don't think it's particularly fun to get hit by charge shots, and I don't think they're particularly skillful either. You kind of just spam them somewhere and hope for the best, but most of the time you're better off with the 4 rockets anyway. I think overall the Cow Mangler is just kind of boring. Again, half the time it's just a rocket launcher, but you get stonewalled by sentry guns. Sometimes it allows you to hold positions without having to go and get resources, but while Soldier is really good at playing defense and kind of perching up somewhere, he's also equally good at blowing himself up on top of the enemy team. In fact, he's actually a lot better when he's doing that. So while you can run defense, it's not exactly the most fun or the most effective thing to be doing. Now, with most of these weapons, I can only really hazard a guess as to whether or not Valve started bottom down, top up, side to side, or using the Algerian method of game design, but with the Man Melter, I am very confident it was a bottom up design that just happened to suck. The Man Melter is very obviously supposed to synergize with the Phlogistinator. The Flog takes away your ability to air blast, and therefore your ability to extinguish your teammates. Oh no! But oh look, the Man Melter allows you to extinguish your teammates with your flare gun, and you even get crits for doing it, so that's awesome, right? But no, not really. It's fine, but Afterburn is something your team is very capable of handling on their own. When you have the Flog, you would much rather be building oomph and killing the enemy team, and this is where the Man Melter is ironically very bad when comboed with the Flog. All of the other flare guns either give you the cool flare gun combo potential or are much better at spreading Afterburn and building oomph. But it just isn't fun to use. You're like babysitting your team, hoping somebody gets lit on fire and not extinguished with one of the 5 other ways they could get rid of the Afterburn themselves, all because you decided to use the one flamethrower that doesn't have air blast. And while you're doing this, you're kind of making that weapon a little bit worse because you're not playing into its strengths as well as you could. And if you don't have the Phlogistinator, then the flare gun eats this thing's lunch. And while we're on the topic of boring and the Phlogistinator,
The Phlogistinator. I think the Phlogistinator is kind of a result of its environment, but there are some flaws. I think pretty much every weapon that can give itself crits consistently always pairs very poorly with Ubercharge, especially anything that is easy to aim, like rockets, sticky bombs, or the flamethrower. And also, the weapon rewards an incredibly passive, overly safe, and frankly uncommittal game plan to a fault. The best way to build oomph is to just sit in the backline, far away from where anybody except maybe snipers could possibly hurt you, and to just spam detonator or scorch shot flares across the map, building up enough eventual afterburn damage to charge oomph. It is an incredibly boring way to play the game, and it's not exactly fun for the opponent either, because for much of the match, the Pyro is guarded by 11 of his teammates in the backline. He's shooting spam that probably doesn't even really matter, but causes annoying afterburn on you, and then eventually he runs around with crits and kills like 4 people. Or if he doesn't have the right support, he gets shot in the face, and that's it. I've said this maybe like 3 dozen times now on this channel, but we really don't need to have a yearly sacrifice of a virgin to the mythical sea snake. We can just go and kill it. But also, Team Fortress 2 works best because players are forced to get up into each other's face and fight over stuff. Squeamishly hiding far away from one another and behind things and taking little pot shots is not exciting. And in combination with the lack of air blast, this makes it so that the Phlogistinator is often just not really that fun. There's obviously a selfish enjoyment you can get out of it by killing like 5 people who didn't see you coming, but just because you're winning doesn't mean the weapon is well designed. See, weapon designs are only good when they give me money, power, and fame. This is why I think the Eureka effect is the only real successful design out of this lot, not because it's really cool, but because I had a heavy investment in wrenches and tiny little antennas. Artistically speaking, I think that Dr. Grordbort's not only is better than the Rift one by quite a bit, but is also one of the better tie-ins. Both conceptually and in execution, I think all of these items not only look good, but they also fit. The only thing I might criticize, and this is a very niche thing, is that these weapons appear like they're supposed to be made out of a very reflective metal, almost like a chrome, but the materials are set up in a way that really just doesn't look like that. They look really flat and rough. The Bison is the only one that even kinda looks shiny. There are some excuses, of course. I think the Cow Mangler is supposed to look a little bit rougher and worn, and the Third Degree is painted, but the Eureka effect, funnily enough, actually looks really bad in my opinion. Again, model material, everything is fine, but then when the light hits it, it just looks terrible. It's just like a blob of white, when it should have these more narrow bands of highlights. Even the grease, which should be a lot rougher, is completely bright. But again, considering this is how far I have to go to find something to say, they look great. The Nanotechnology Bundle, also known as the Deus Ex promotion, features some of the worst weapons ever added to Team Fortress 2. And the Widowmaker. The Machina promotes the absolute worst parts of Sniper's gameplay, hard scoping and body shots. The Diamondback is way too rewarding to Spy for doing his job that is already rather rewarding, and also for, like, sapping a teleporter. It is negligently more powerful than the Revolver, and it's kind of annoying that he can hide the crits behind disguises. But these two are practically nothing compared to the Short Circuit. It might just be that I'm a bitter soldier player, but I am absolutely convinced that this weapon was glued together with some of the discarded bone ash from Hitler's corpse because his latent evil still emanates from the design. The original version is fine, but the post-Blue Moon update version is genuinely one of the dumbest weapons I've ever seen. Yeah, like what if Engineer could shoot a gigantic ball that he couldn't miss even if he had 2 left hands and no eyes, and it blinds you so you can't fucking see him, and it damages you, and it destroys all your rockets and your grenades and your stickies, and it only costs him a resource that he and the cart can make an infinite amount of. And who would have imagined that this became kind of annoying? This is one of those weapons that fixes a problem that doesn't really exist. Like, they designed these characters with these specific weaknesses in mind, and then much later on down the line, they decided to make unlocks whose sole purpose was to get rid of that weakness. Like, oh, Sniper gets really negatively affected by fire. Well, what if we just made it so he never had to deal with that? Oh, Demo Man isn't really good in the close range, so what if we just made a weapon that makes it so you don't have to deal with that? Spy has visible dental plaquing in cavities because of his 4 muffin 3 Dr. Pepper breakfasts. So what if we gave him a weapon that makes it so he doesn't have to deal with that? Engineer can easily get spammed out by Demo Man or soldiers. You get where I'm going with this. This sort of design philosophy is inherently flawed, and in my opinion, almost every single weapon that came out as a result of it is problematic in some way or another. You end up with one of two things typically: either the weapon successfully patches a designed, intentionally crafted vulnerability in a class and is therefore a pain in the ass for everybody else, or it's useless against most of the characters, but is a problem for one or two of them, like the Darwin's Danger Shield.
Now, from where you're standing, the situation probably looks pretty rough, right? Your chips are down, all of the Deus Ex weapons suck, the pirates are losing by 38 runs, we've got a gun to your head, your cat turned out to be a shapeshifter, and there's some girl in the corner who keeps talking about AO3 and something called an X-Reader fic. But hark, what is that radiant luminance at the end of the tunnel? That hopeful clarion whose song inspires the hearts of men? Why, it can't be. It is the Widowmaker! The coolest fucking gun ever added by any of these dumbass cross promotions. In short, I really fucking hate the Widowmaker. I want it destroyed, just like whales. No, jokes aside, this thing is awesome. This is probably my favorite engineer primary. I don't want to hear anything about how the shotgun is more consistent. I don't want to hear anything about how the Frontier Justice is more explosive. And I don't want to hear anybody say, Kaluka, the Yeti is right behind you, turn around right now, because it doesn't matter. The Widowmaker is just so much fun. It's skillful, but also punishing, and therefore rewarding for the enemy player's efforts. It forces you to really think about how you use your metal and about what wrench you pair it with. You can be really aggressive and go on these really great rampages, especially if your team has a crits medic. Where the Machina promotes the absolute worst parts of sniper gameplay, the Widowmaker encourages the best parts of engineer gameplay. And it's not problematic like something like the Short Circuit because it's just a shotgun and sometimes it has a larger magazine capacity. And I guess it can also maybe help the engineer like build up his sentry gun a little bit if he goes positive enough. Nothing that could cause any kind of a problem. And as a result, the Widowmaker is carrying all of the weapons in this pack on its back. The Widowmaker is the only one of these four that I find myself equipping just for the sake of using it, out of the sheer enjoyment I'll get as opposed to doing so because it's effective or useful. Engineer has this weird phenomenon where all of his weapons become vastly more problematic the moment there's 2 or 3 of them, like the Wrangler, the Short Circuit, and the Rescue Ranger. But this gun is, I believe, the only engineer exclusive weapon that doesn't care whether or not there's a second engineer, at least beyond the inherent power of having 2 players. Artistically speaking, the Deus Ex weapons are something of a paradox. Conceptually, they're all a failure, because they were literally designed for a different game. But execution-wise, I think they're actually a resounding success. The forms, the modeling, the shape language, and the materials are all fantastic. If the mission statement was to make a Team Fortress 2 version of these Deus Ex weapons, they knocked it out of the park. It doesn't do much to curb the shrinking middle class, but it is a really good looking TF2 item. These are some of my favorite assets to just like stare at when I'm not playing the game. And I think if you were to mess with the materials a little bit, like if you just gave the guns wooden furniture or something, nobody would ever notice. Even though I don't think anybody really notices to begin with. The cosmetics from this pack, sadly, are not at the same level of quality in my opinion. I think the company man is like fine, it's innocent enough, even if it is just a hat, and it's certainly not the best ball cap the game has. And I think the Deus specs, alongside having a really good name, are small enough that you really wouldn't notice them. I rarely ever see these cosmetics anyway, so at the very worst, they're unpopular. Now again, I'm not really one of those stooges who cares a great deal about artistic consistency. That's not to say that I'm against it or whatever. I would prefer if all of the cosmetics and assets in this game and in all games were cohesive, at least as best as we can do it, and I'm not really a fan of hats like this, or this, but also I think that some less popular hats do have their genuine fans. For me, I don't really care about hats, I can ignore bad ones. I would prefer we only get good hats or whatever, but if it's a deal breaker for somebody else, I don't really mind. I'm not here to try to make people feel bad about their particular preference of TF2 hats. But that being said, I think the Purity Fist and the Nano Balaclava are really ugly. The Purity Fist is at least a cool looking model, even though thematically it doesn't really fit. The Nano Balaclava is just butt. I genuinely don't think I've ever seen anybody wear this, at least not for a very, very long time. It's not fitting in any way, and in my opinion, they kind of ruined the design by collapsing the visor. I think they did this to try to help communicate that this is Spy underneath of this hat.
which I guess the rest of his body doesn't do. But even if that were the goal, the hat still covers up enough of his face that it's hard to see. They should have just gone for broke and had it occlude his entire head. At least then the visor could be flicked up and you wouldn't be stuck with this weird half measure where the helmet has some of the visor down, but then not the rest of it in this weird, awkward shape. It kind of bothers me a little bit. In fact, I think that out of protest, every day I'm going to steal from a small family-owned business local to me until Valve fixes it. Now, I think I'm supposed to tell you that all of these tie-ins are interesting in some way, but I really don't think I can say that for the Triad Pack. The Triad Pack features some of the most bland weapon design the game has ever seen, like the Hulong Heater. The Hulong Heater technically does count as weapon design, but that isn't really a title I would like to give it. It's confusing, it's shallow, and it's uninspired. We've made a lot of assumptions about Valve and what they keep in their basement and their weapon design process in this video, but I wouldn't be surprised if somebody told me that the Hulong Heater only exists because they got the fire ring thing working. It would be a spectacle to see whichever devs at Valve were responsible for this weapon try to explain themselves, right? Like, what could possibly have been the plan here? What truly is the point? What about Heavy's character design was desperate for a circle of fire that he toots out over and over? And was this really something he needed so badly that Heavy players wanted to throw away all of their ammo for it? I don't think Valve really knows. The fucked up part is that the heater that most people agree today is poorly designed, if effective enough to not be a liability, is the new version. The old heater was just the firing gimmick and the ammo drain. That's it. The Hulong Heater that we have rightfully been criticizing for like 8 years now is the fixed version. This is the one we got after Valve tried to start that foreseeably disastrous combination private prison and knife factory, and after they tried to overhaul the design in Meet Your Match to create something more interesting. This is the good heater we're talking about, and it still sucks. Was Heavy really missing close-range damage? Is that what they were trying to give him? Because Heavy is one of, if not the most devastating close-range threats in the game, and the range at which he becomes that threat extends far beyond where the fire circle can actually hit. Was this just to mess with spies? I could believe that, because that does appear to be the secret modus operandi of the TF2 team, making spies' life harder than it already is. Not that this weapon does a very good job of that, of course. In fact, all this weapon really does, except waste your ammo, is make spies' jobs slightly more inconvenient, punishing people who aren't paying attention, and it can punish scouts who get too aggressive, and it's, I guess, okay against demo knights? And sometimes if you get really close to people, you can light them on fire and get the bonus damage. I think the only really funny thing this does is combo quite well with the Holiday Punch, because you can stun the enemy and then burn them to death. Otherwise, this weapon's advantages suffer much the same problems as the Sun on a Stick, and at best help you get a kill on someone you get the drop on, which I'm sure the minigun was not already much more capable of doing. Our second triad weapon is the Neon Annihilator. Now, I could reiterate what has already been long-windedly explained about why this weapon is bad. Crits on fire enemies, easy, cause pyro make fire. Crits on water, much worse, blah blah, but who really cares, right? You could not possibly convince a Neon Annihilator fan to put the sign down just because you tell them for the 8,000th time that it sucks. Because that is part of what they like about it. They're here for the useless, jokey nature of the weapon, and honestly, a weapon being unviable and unproblematic for normal play, but having a fanbase dedicated to trying to make something funny happen with it is really not the worst thing that could happen to a crossover item. It's bad, but it's goofy, and 99% of the time you're never gonna hear or see from it, and the 1% of the people who do use it love it, so what's the problem, right? However, to play devil's advocate here, because I owe him one after he gave me a ride to the hospital when I tried to catch that meteor and got vaporized from the waist up, it's probably best to keep the number of weapons like this to a minimum. We'll talk more about this later, but it's a razor-thin line between an endearing weapon we think is funny and not really hurting anything enough to be criticized, and a weapon which, while maybe harmless, isn't actually a good design or deserving of a place in the game. With that said, I think the Neon Annihilator is beloved just enough to eke by, even though I rarely see anyone use this anymore, and frankly I don't blame anybody for not using it because it is boring. The red tape recorder is probably the most interesting weapon out of this bunch. On the surface, and according to common doctrine, the red tape recorder is like the worst weapon on Earth. And this is partially true because it's a sapper, and the sapper is the worst possible baseline for any weapon in the game. It does literally nothing much of the time, and exists just to make spies' dealings with buildings less awkward than they were in Team Fortress Classic. Because in that game, Spy just kinda had to like disguise his way over towards a sentry and then like throw frag grenades at it from around the corner. He's actually, funnily enough, not that good at dealing with sentries. So the sapper tries to help that, and kind of succeeds. But I don't think the case is closed on this weapon, mostly because of my proximity to Cyber Wizard, who is the king and the most valiant defender of the red tape recorder. He brings up some niche but kind of valid points about it, like how it disables buildings for longer periods of time, keeping engineers from using that building slot unless they commit to fixing the building or waiting it out until it blows up, or how it can kill buildings incredibly quickly while they're being built, sometimes instantaneously. It also locks buildings down for longer in the event you need to resap them, which can give you more time to harass the engineer. I personally still don't think this makes the weapon good, but I will say that we need to remember to get espresso powder so we can make the tiramisu for my brother's Christmas party on the 21st. Don't forget. And that there is more than meets the eye to this sapper. I probably wouldn't say too much more though. The cleaver is our final stop and easily the most ubiquitously used triad weapon. Personally speaking, I think the cleaver is quite good overall. It's more fun to use than it is annoying to be the victim of, but I can understand why sweatier audiences aren't in love with it. Scout is already a powerhouse character, and it can be annoying to have such potent 1v1 potential, and to be given long-range spam that deals half of a meat shot's worth of damage up front, with possibly more if you let the bleed go on for too long. I can see how that would be frustrating. Still, I enjoy using the cleaver quite a bit. The cleaver kind of flips the Scout's secondary slot on its head. Normally, pistols are designed to clean up a kill that you narrowly missed out on because of inaccuracy or ammo shortages with your scatter gun, or because the enemy team responded to your presence once you went in for the kill. But it is really great as an initiation tool. It does that big chunk of damage, and the bleed applies pressure to the enemy and makes your scatter gun just a hair more dangerous than it already is. It's neat, and I think it's funny that it combos with the Rap Assassin better than it does with the Sandman now. I know people who played Team Fortress 2 for 38 combined hours were really strung up on the old Sandman combo. If you don't know because you're one of those people, the cleaver used to crit stunned enemies, because this combo allows you to play Scout without actually playing Scout like 10% of the time, but I do not miss it. That being said, if the combo is really that important to like the culture of Team Fortress, I think there are ways you can reward that combo without just throwing crits around. I was able to make this change pretty easily, causing the cleaver to reduce its cooldown heavily if you hit an enemy who is affected by the stun condition, which the Sandman applies, and I think this is not only rewarding for the Scout, but not nearly as obnoxious to deal with for the victim. Obviously, I would have to go through more testing, but this is just a hypothetical. A phenomenon I've experienced a few times now with the triad weapons is that I will load into Team Fortress with some friends, equip one of them, and then get asked why I'm using the red tape recorder or the Hulong heater, and have to explain myself by saying it's a promo item. For artistic consistency types, this is probably the best thing you've ever heard, outside of the angelic harmonics of Gloria Gaynor, or the news that Henry Kissinger got hit by that big piano, because it means that these items are so well integrated into TF2's art style that some people don't even know what game these are supposed to be from, or that they're even from another game. And that's partially because A, these weapons look fantastic, especially the red tape recorder in my opinion, and B, because 3 of the 4 of them are not directly from Sleeping Dogs, only the cleaver is, and obviously a cleaver is a generic enough item that it fits pretty much anywhere. For the first time since the last time though, the cosmetics for this pack are also equally good. When people say an item in Team Fortress 2 doesn't match the art style, in my experience they almost always mean the color palette or the setting. There's much more that can cause friction, but the triad items don't cause any. They fit everything about TF2 so nicely that, again, I don't think most people anymore realize they're from another game. They're great in both concept and execution, though I do have some minor gripes. I think the champ stamp is pretty low resolution for what is effectively just a plane that wraps around the merc's arms, like the texture's the whole thing, but that is quite minor and they look fine. Now I hope you've got some gas left in the tank, because we need to make our contribution to the giant puddle everyone's constructing, or else we're gonna get kicked out of Gas Club. And because the final major crossover that we need to talk about is the Shogun pack. The Shogun pack is actually noteworthy for being the only crossover that Robin Walker has mentioned by name as being something that Valve was specifically proud of.
I think that to us, when we look around at like what we've done there and which ones are we most excited by, I think the ones that we would all point to would be the Shogun stuff. We're really happy with those items. We think that they visually fit TF style really nicely. They were made by Rob Laro, who did the Soldiers public count pack with the black box, and we love Rob's work. We think he understands TF style really well.
And I can see why, because it does have samurai, and samurai are pretty cool, but also because, as far as one of these promos goes, I think this might be the best pack out of all of them. The weapons are generally well designed, overall not very problematic, and have proven to be very popular. And even though all of the cosmetics didn't quite catch on in the same way, the Samurai and the No Mercy are some of the most widely used hats in the game. Like, the No Mercy is a cemented part of Spy's visual history. The most diminutive and least popular of these weapons is easily the Fan of War, and this is for a really simple reason. There's not a lot of incentive for Scout to go into melee and hit somebody with a thing that then gives him more damage on his next attack when he could just kill you with the scattergun. It can do some cute stuff, like you can combo it with the Force of Nature, which coincidentally acronyms out to FAN, to get cheeky one-shot kills on people, and it does have legitimate uses in MVM, but otherwise, like, why would a Scout ever do this? You could just kill people. The second weakest of these weapons is the Conqueror, and the Conqueror is fine. It is completely fine. It is the most, sure, why not, okay, milquetoast, 5 out of 10, whatever weapon in the entire game. It is easily the most well-balanced of all of the banners, for better or worse. It's not useless 80% of the time, but very explosive like the buff banner, and it doesn't have the incredible power of the battalion's backup if your team knows what they're doing, while also not being so bad that I would, try to scare people away from playing it. Personally, I don't traditionally equip it. If I'm in a casual game and I don't seem to have much healing, I would rather just use either the black box because I think it provides better sustain, or I would just equip the gunboats so I don't have to take as much rocket jump damage to heal off to begin with, or both. But it's fine. If crossover weapons were all like this, and not like the short circuit, the game would, in my opinion, be in a significantly better place. The last two weapons in this pack are far and away much more popular, much more powerful, and the only parts of the entire Shogun crossover that are slightly problematic. The Zatoichi is the lesser of the two evils, despite the fact that both of these weapons are actually really similar. Overall, I do like this weapon. I think it had a positive effect on Demo Knight, even if sometimes it's frustrating to fight against. The best thing the Zatoichi does is that it allows the Demo Knight to make very aggressive, very active, and risky plays. It allows the Demo Knight to be an active participant in the front lines of the match. It lets him go for plays that normally would just result in him either dying or at best going for a trade and getting away with it because of the health he's rewarded with. It's very much like the Persian Persuader or the Claymore. It allows a Demo Knight who's good at picking their battles or who is skillful to stay in the fight, to continue being a threat and to actively go after their opponents. It's not like the Eyelander, by comparison, which is the most passive and the most cowardly of all the swords. You might not think of it that way because, oh, it gives you more health, it allows you to stay in the fight for longer and to take more beatings than you normally can, but in reality, I think Eyelander demos end up playing much more passively and only go for really easy kills so that they're never at risk of losing their heads. And overall, I think this is better gameplay. The Zatoichi is probably the most frustrating out of these three because it does allow the Demo Knight to heal, which basically just undoes any punishment you're dishing out to him. Like, it can be annoying to be shooting at a Demo Knight and he goes up and just harvests one of your unwitting slack-jawed teammates for a full health bar and then gets away. But overall, you have to play Demo Knight to make this thing work, and Demo Knight has enough weaknesses that I can't really complain. And the problem transfers over to the Demo Knight's twin brother, the Kunai. The Kunai is probably the most below-the knife the Spy has, and the critics aren't exactly wrong about it. The Kunai does allow for some frustrating moments very similar to what the Zatoichi does. It again can be really frustrating to call out a spy or to tell your teammates that there's a spy or whatever, or to even be directly shooting at the spy while he's going for a kill, and because he stabs one of your teammates who isn't listening or isn't paying attention, he just gets a full health bar and all of the damage you've dealt to him up to this point is gone, alongside all the ammo you spent to do that. And this can allow for the spy to get some pretty ludicrous chains, even while he's being attacked. There's an argument that I think is valid that says that With the Dead Ringer, the kunai kind of allows for spies to too easily just tunnel vision on getting kills on enemies who have their music way too loud, while ignoring all of the other skills you're supposed to be exhibiting as a spy just because the healing lets you basically brute force your way to another kill. I don't think people who say that are necessarily wrong, but I do think the kunai gets a little bit too much hate. I think people kind of hyperfixate on the times where the kunai does something crazy, and not enough on the times where the kunai is an active liability. And the reasoning for this makes a lot of sense. You don't have any reason to pay attention to a spy who just gets killed the moment he decloaks or whatever. That doesn't make for a good clip show. No one is going to make the self-masochistic, I equipped the kunai and got one-shot a bunch of times video. They're gonna make the, I equipped the kunai and chained a bunch of free-to-plays video because that looks way cooler. And in the game itself, you have no reason to pay attention to a spy who got one-shot because he's no longer a threat. Your brain is instead going to transition to the other things that are trying to kill you. So all of the times where the kunai just gets someone killed sort of gets swept under the subconscious rug, whereas all of the times where it does something crazy, we highlight because, oh my god, he just killed like 5 of our teammates. And then he recorded it and he posted it on YouTube or TikTok or whatever, and the 2 times before that where he decloaked and got shot in the face, no one pays attention to because no one was around to record it. It's kind of like that old parable. If a tree shits in the woods, does the journey of 1,000 miles start with a single step? I also don't think the kunai gets enough credit for the cool things it allows spies to do, like using the extra health to sentry surf. And as far as what this means for the Shogun pack, if this is the worst designed weapon in the entire collection, we're doing pretty great. Visually speaking, I think these weapons also look fantastic, and that's because they're made by Bone Man, aka Laro Laro, who's also the person who did the Deus Ex pack, and did the Tank Buster set, which in their own right are fantastic looking. I won't go on about topology too much, but just look at the difference between these 2 models. The materials as well, like the surfaces, the texturing, look great. You pretty much already heard what I thought about the cosmetics, and even though the Top Knot and the Geisha Boy were probably never going to be that popular, that doesn't mean the assets themselves are bad, they just kinda look silly. And with that, we are done with all of the major crossovers. So as far as weapons go, we have to come to some kind of a conclusion. And I conclude that you could probably remove like 80% of the weapons added in these updates, and the game would not only not get worse, it would probably get better. I think this comes down to the team being put somewhat on the spot. They either didn't put in the work or didn't have the time to really consult the game and the status it was in and see what it needed, or to really flesh out a strong foundational design. They had to make assets for these tie-ins, and they had to make them probably relatively quick, and they had to come up with ideas really fast. So they looked at the only source of inspiration they had, which was the weapons they were supposed to be adding, and in some cases just had to settle for what they had. I think you can see this pretty clearly with the Rift crossover. Valve either didn't know what else to do given the amount of time they had, or they were literally forced to by the agreement that they signed, so they just kind of copied the function of a couple of Rift weapons and put it in TF2. And as a result, we got weapons that have just been wasting people's backpack space. Team Fortress 2 is a difficult game to genuinely make good weapons for. The nuts and bolts are wound pretty tightly on this game, but even still, I think in a lot of cases, Valve succeeded. Not every weapon is like a landmark improvement on the game, but a lot of them are. The Gunslinger, the Market Gardener, the Gunboats, the Sandwich, the Crusader's Crossbow, the Shields. I think all of these weapons have had a profound and overall positive impact on the game. And I don't think I can say that about a vast majority of the promo items. In fact, I don't think most of the promo items are even just fun. The question truly comes down to your opinion on the matter. There's 2 major arguments, and I won't tell you which one I agree with until after we assess both so I don't influence you. The first hand says that, while a weapon might be harmless, many of these designs are ultimately disappointing and in most cases aren't even independently fun. Not even bothering to mention that they don't have any significant positive impact on the greater metagame or design of TF2. For the people who wanted these designs to be cooler, they're left with frustration, longing for a would-be balance patch to swoop in and fix some of them, with most players opting to leave them behind to collect cobwebs in their backpacks, with only a few willing to try and squeeze some fun out of what is otherwise a badly designed weapon that people generally do not seek out or enjoy. This is almost the best case scenario, because occasionally some of these chop shop designs actually harm the game for significant numbers of people, again like the Short Circuit or the kunai. If you agree with this, you basically agree that Team Fortress 2 has very high standards for weapon design because it had very high capabilities for weapon design. The team were capable of and routinely produced weapons that truly shifted the landscape of TF2's gameplay and enhanced it in a profound way. Like how the Market Gardener improved the design of Soldier, or how Combo Pyro took a character who was languishing in mediocrity brought out by her role in TF1 and made her significantly more interesting and fun. And if they can't do that, then at the very least weapons should be independently fun to use regardless of their role in the metagame, like the Dragon's Fury. If the game, or at this point a game, is capable of producing designs that have this kind of effect, because the jury's kinda out on TF2, let's be honest, then we should reserve new additions exclusively for designs that have confident, thought-out designs and therefore more often result in weapons that fit into the game's ecosystem or are at least enjoyable to use. The Thompson might not be hurting anyone, but that doesn't mean it deserves a place in the pantheon when the work that went into it could have been used on something better. The second-hand argument is this: if a weapon is overall very harmless and doesn't cause significant friction in the gameplay, and even a small group of people enjoy it, then it's a fine inclusion. Obviously, people who believe this aren't throwing their cares to the wind and suddenly want bad designs to clog up the games they play, but in the event that they do happen, they're not going to let this ruin their game because they can overlook or ignore bad designs, and sometimes you can even glean some fun from their flaws. People have enjoyed low power or bad designs for things in games for decades. There's entire groups of people who have a soft spot for this kind of function and try to make the best of it. It's not preferable maybe, but pursuing the heights that these weapons are capable of, or just goofing off with them, is fun in its own right. This might not look good from an intangible essayist's perspective on TF2, but in the real-world practical situations you find yourself in when playing the game, the Hulong Hater or the Third Degree probably create more enjoyment doing the things they can do than they subtract by simply existing. I can see the validity of both sides of this argument. After all, I went to bat for the Neon Annihilator because I think it's cute, and I brought the hammer down on the Thompson because I think it's boring. Personally though, I agree more with argument 1. While these weapons were and are mostly non-problematic to the game as a whole, I think there's a razor-fine line between a weapon that's just mediocre and unenjoyable in 90% of contexts, and a weapon which is cute enough to slip past this criticism. TF2 is simply capable of better, or was, and in my opinion, even the people who stand up for some of these poorer weapons aren't doing so because they're 100% satisfied with the design, they're doing so to prove a point or something. I don't think anyone is really totally happy with the Thompson, but they'll use it anyway, if only to be the guy who top scored with the Thompson. And that's fine, of course, there's nothing wrong with that, I just don't think it's better. I'm not saying that these designs don't have their genuine fans either, but I can't imagine even a completely serious enjoyer of the Thompson or the Bison being happy that this gun has 3 negative attributes for the sake of apparently nothing. Maybe animation quality? I'm not sure. The same goes for the other weapons too, like the sharpened volcano fragment, which I've very rarely ever seen anyone try to use, let alone defend. Most of the noise I see made about the volcano fragment is people asking, how do we fix the volcano fragment? I'm one of those less is more types, or at least less can be more kinds of people, and I think TF2 would have been fine without some of its weapons. That being said, I will admit there is one golden advantage to having garbage in this game, and that is YouTube content. No joke. I think one of the best things weapons like the volcano fragment have ever given TF2 were subject matter that could be turned into YouTube videos. Extraneous media has always been at the forefront of TF2's success, and in 2020, when the world locked down and an entire generation of people, and especially kids, had nothing to do but sit around on their parents' old-ass laptop and pick boogers out of their nose, Greg, they sought out content and games to play that would run on a 2016 Toshiba satellite, with TF2 primely positioned to soak up all of their attention. Weapons like this provided easy-to-understand analysis that probably bloomed for many into a greater appreciation for the game. Or they just repeat the shit they hear on YouTube forever, whether or not it's true. Who's to say? This, of course, isn't an excuse for how bad these weapons are, it's just kind of funny. Cosmetics are luckily a lot easier to talk about. Like I've said before with the more specific examples across this video, cosmetics from promotional events have one fundamental problem. Design-wise, they are incredibly hit or miss. It depends on how many parts of another game's art style align with Team Fortress 2's. Something like the dadliest catch obviously looks out of place, and like an advertisement. But something like the beastly bonnet by comparison is probably a cosmetic that most people don't even know is supposed to be associated with a video game. There is one thing that I think Team Fortress 2 did quite well on, and is kind of a weird thing to have to even point out. It seems like it's so obvious that it should go unsaid, but the artists behind many of these items did a very good job of making it so the assets look like Team Fortress 2 assets. Many of these items are modeled and materialized in a way that fits with Team Fortress 2. And again, that sounds really obvious. Even if you're doing a cross-promotion like this, you should at least make it look like like the item itself fits in your game, but then you see something like Beavis and Butthead in Black Ops 6, and you wonder if maybe not everybody gets this, or much more likely, if they even care. At the very least, they did the tangible parts of this affair correctly, which is good, but still, it's kind of a disappointment that for such a significant portion of this game's history, it was used as an advertising platform for Valve to rake a little money out of. It might not seem like it, but a significant portion of the arsenal does just exist to advertise some game, about 13% of weapons, alongside, of course, dozens and dozens of cosmetics, most of which I don't think Team Fortress 2 is necessarily better for having. But don't get me wrong, the silver lining weapons and cosmetics, the ones that work, are really nice. Exactly why this turned out the way it did is something of a mystery. Very few people have significant insight into the day-to-day operations of Valve. But if I had to take a guess, I don't think it's because Valve was, like, malicious or didn't care about TF2 or whatever. Though I do think they could have afforded to be a bit more selective. It's possible that at the time, building up Steam was just priority number one. So every other game had to sort of bend the knee in service of making Steam as much of a juggernaut as they could. It's also very possible that the team simply believed in what they were doing and they really liked making these cross-promotions. In the interview I referenced earlier, Robin Walker speaks pretty enthusiastically about them. It's also possible that it was simply too good of a deal for Valve to pass up. For certain games especially, Valve could be getting a lot of money or just a lot of attention onto their major distribution platform that is now the bedrock of the entire company. And according to Robin Walker, these promo packs are really easy to make.
So one is the amount of promotional stuff we do. It's important to realize that promotional stuff in general is an incredibly small amount of work for us. Like, to do an item, like, a single promotional item or a couple of items usually takes us a couple of days.
So I don't exactly blame Valve for making them, which is probably why we got so many of these, even for games that weren't exactly turning a lot of head. Even if it wasn't much work individually, though, I think it's fair for fans to have been disappointed that this work wasn't consolidated on the things that the game either needed or were at least dedicated to it. I try not to be one of those woe is me, Valve hates our game kinds of Team Fortress 2 players, but I will say it is a little bit annoying seeing that at the exact same time that Dota was getting promotional events for its highest levels of competition, for its best plays, its best players, for its gameplay, that Team Fortress 2 was getting promotions for Kingdoms of Amalur, which is just kind of disappointing. Oh yeah, if you're a fan of these longer videos, sorry, I don't think I'm gonna be doing them that much anymore. But if you're a fan of the shorter stuff, that's good. In fact, the plan for this year is to try to take this channel a little more seriously. Thank you all for sticking with me so far, and I will see you, hopefully, in February.